Hey gang. All right. Well, we are back again with another little lab review video. Okay, and this one's going to be on lab 3, so blood vessels. And as we kind of saw in class, there are a lot of blood vessels that you are responsible for knowing for the upcoming quiz/celebration of knowledge. Okay. So in this review, obviously we're going to go through what the anatomy of the different types of blood vessels are. So between arteries, arterioles, veins, venules, and capillaries. And then we're also going to chat about, what are the different kinds of blood vessels we can see in the body? What do they send blood to, and what do they drain blood from? Okay. And you're also responsible for knowing the tracing, like the path of like the blood flow. So if I were to give you, for example, the aorta, and I give you a bunch of different other vessels in there, you'd have to put those vessels in order, for example, of how they travel from the aorta and which order they would go in as they were traveling back through the blood circulatory system. Okay. So a pretty jam-packed lab that we had. Okay, and obviously we have our learning objectives. We're going to go through those really quick. We have 5 of them this week. Last week was a little bit shorter, but this week we're kind of back up, growing in numbers again. So, the first one I have here is describe the structural difference between arteries, capillaries, and veins. All right, which I said we'll do. Identify the indicated structures on the blood vessel model, which we won't really be able to do that one here on the video, but I'm just going to highlight this one right now since we'll say we did this one even though we can't do it because we don't have the model here for the videos. Okay, you'll have to do that in class or on your own time if you go back down to the lab. Okay. Identify the indicated blood vessels on the images, which we have a lot of those. Name the organ/region of the body supplied/drained by the indicated arteries or veins, which I also just mentioned. And then, like I said for my last point, trace the path of the blood flow through the arteries, veins of the circulatory system, and the unique path as well as the hepatic portal system. All right, so we'll do that. First things first, we have our little pre-lab prep here. And this is kind of just a review. This is more of a medical terminology, sort of a pre-lab prep. So anyone who's ever taken medical terminology in the past, or anyone who's ever, who knows, had a previous anatomy class and, learned some of these terms, this should be a little bit of a breeze to you. Otherwise, if you need help with this, Chapter 20, Appendix E, or glossary in your textbook, okay? But let's go through these. So just a little reminder, all these things over here, this is either the Latin or the Greek terminology, how they were termed many, many years ago for how they identified them on the human body. But then as we evolutionize, we grow in knowledge, we gain more layman's terms of how we define these things. So that's all we're doing here. We're just matching the layman's terms to the Greek or Latin terminology terms that they used. Okay. So let's start with the first one. So renal is kidney. Okay. Renal disease, if you've ever heard of that, that's referring to the kidney. Hepatic, if anyone has ever heard of hepatitis or remember getting a hepatitis injection, what you're actually getting an injection for is the liver, trying to protect your liver from those diseases, okay? Axillary is a little bit of a weird one. Axillary, believe it or not, your armpit. I always thought it was helpful to remember A and A, so A and armpit, so that's how I always remember that when I was learning this in school. Popliteal, this is a very weird one. No one really knows what this region is, but it is actually the area behind your knee. It is number C, letter C here. You can actually get something called a Baker's cyst in the back of the knee, which is just a collection of inflammatory fluid that happens a lot. And usually people that have arthritis, but also people that get any sort of injury, you can get a collection of fluid that drains into that popliteal space back there. Okay. Brachial, kind of like the brachialis muscle. Remember, that's in the arm, so that is A here. Mesenteric. Mesenteric is a very strange one here, but it actually means intestines, okay? That's because we have a couple different mesenteric arteries and veins, and that drains or supplies blood all to the intestines, okay? Splenic is pretty straightforward. Splenic matches a lot with spleen here, so that's that one. Gastric, gaster, if anyone's ever heard of gastritis or anything like that, it's referring to stomach. So gastroenteritis is the stomach bug, fancy term for it. That's option L here. Subclavian, pretty straightforward. So sub meaning below, clave referring to the clavicle. So this is below the clavicle. So this is option B here. Cephalic is referring to the head. So the cephalum always refers to the head. So that is option E here. a little over the lines right there. Jugular is referring to the neck or the throat. The J right there. And then, yeah, just through process of elimination, we have H here. That'll be thigh. Forgot to cross off some of these, but this would be H here. So thigh. Femoral, referring to the femur bone, okay? All right, so pre-lab prep, I feel like that's pretty straightforward. So make sure we have these terms down. Almost for every artery or every vessel, we'll see with the exception of a few special ones, specifically in the veins. They're all going to be named based off of these names here: femoral artery, femoral vein, internal, external jugular, cephalic vein, subclavian artery, etc. The list can go on and on. Okay, so long story short, all these terms here are very important to know. They give some indication on where the vessel is in the body and what it is either supplying or draining. Okay. So make sure we have these guys memorized. Let's scroll down. All right, so let's start with the anatomy of blood vessels, okay? So as we know, blood vessels are the closed system of tubes in our body that carry blood to everything, to muscles, to different organs, to bones. They're everywhere, okay? They're everywhere in the body. And we have a couple pictures in our lab manual that show us that. So remember, arteries, A, okay? Arteries, A. So I'm going to underline this guy here. Underline this guy. Arteries away. AA. Arteries away. Because they always carry blood away, right, from the heart. And branch into progressively smaller vessels as they pass through organs and tissues. Oxygens and nutrients that have been traveling in the arterial blood diffuse through the tissues through tiny, thin-walled vessels called capillaries, okay? And then after that, the carbon dioxide and other waste products produced by cells will diffuse also back into the capillaries. And then that blood will then flow through a series of veins, which return it to the heart. Okay. So veins always go to the heart. Arteries always go away. And capillaries is kind of that mixing point, right? Because it is the draining point for all the oxygenated blood, but it's also the receiving point for all like the carbon dioxide waste products from organs and other tissues in our body to send it back through the heart, okay, to be filtered. So let's talk about the histology a little bit. The walls of arteries and veins have three distinct tissue layers, okay? Tunica interna, all right? That's, as it's in the name, interna. It's the most internal layer, so it's the deepest layer. It is the layer that's actually exposed to blood and consists mainly of simple squamous epithelium called endothelium. All right. The middle layer is called the tunica media. Very easy. Media, right in the middle. It is the most variable amongst the blood vessels. Okay. That's because some blood vessels have it, some don't. This layer consists of smooth muscle and elastic tissue. Both arteries and veins have muscle. Okay. Underline that, which is responsible for producing changes in blood vessel diameter, such as vasoconstriction and vasodilation. So if a different part of your body needs more blood to it, such as when you're running or running a race or something, you're going to want to vasodilate your arteries or your veins near those muscles because more blood needs to be pumped into those to be able to supply them. All right. Versus when it's really, really cold outside, you may notice that your veins, sometimes in a lot of weightlifters, or sometimes if it's very hot outside, veins can actually pop out of people's arms or different parts of their body. When it's very cold, your body wants to try and retain all that heat. So the way it does that is by vasoconstricting. So all those veins get smaller, so they move or they constrict deeper inside our tissue. So that way the cold isn't hitting the veins or anything like that. So it's not pumping cold blood back to the heart to cool us off. That makes sense. Okay. So those are some good examples there. Arteries, though, have much more elastic tissue than veins, and that's because of the pressure, all right? Elastic tissue reduces the pressure fluctuations that occur in the arteries as the heart contracts, right? Heart has a lot of pressure when it contracts, and we'll talk about the cardiac physiology, and we'll show the pressure diagrams. But arteries have to retain a lot of that pressure, so it does that by using elastic tissue, okay? This helps reduce the stress on the heart and the vessels. In contrast, veins do not have much elastic tissue, okay? That's because they have the lowest pressure of all vessels, okay? Think about it. Pressure is very high in the arteries as it's being pumped out. When it gets to the capillaries, the pressure significantly drops off, right? Because it starts diffusing. You don't want to have a high-pressure artery or high-pressure capillary because it would make it very hard for oxygen and all that stuff to diffuse if the blood is continuously just being pumped at a very high pressure. So when blood enters capillaries, it slows down, the pressure reduces, and after it moves from the capillaries to the veins, that pressure is at its lowest, okay? That pressure is at its lowest. So, as a result, some veins, especially those in the limbs, have valves, right? We've seen valves, think back to the heart, prevents backflow of blood between heartbeats, okay? Capillaries do not have a tunica media. This is that example I was talking about. It says it is the most variable. This is where the variable comes in. So capillaries do not have a tunic media because the muscle and elastic tissue would make it significantly harder to diffuse. Okay, so it'd slow the rate of diffusion between the blood and tissue. So you want to have the smallest, the thinnest amount of tissue layer there possible to be able to allow nutrients and whatever to be able to diffuse properly and at a optimal rate across the tissues. Okay. And lastly, the outermost layer is called the tunica externa. Externa meaning the most external. Okay. It contains connective tissue that connects the vessel to surrounding tissues and organs. Okay. So 3 layers here. Interna, all right, is the most deep. Externa, most superficial. I feel like it's pretty easy to learn these ones, which one would be the most internal, which one would be the most external, okay? So make sure we have these guys down. Make sure we remember a few key points here. I'd say a very big key point would be talking about the capillaries. They don't have a tunica externa because that would slow the rate of diffusion, okay? So make sure we know that. All right, a couple things here for us to fill out, okay? By definition, arteries carry blood, blank the heart. Remember, arteries carry blood away from the heart. All right, so this would be away from the heart, okay? And veins carry blood to the heart. All right, so pretty easy right there, pretty straightforward. Which type of blood vessel contains a lot of elastic tissue? All right. Well, as we talked about, remember, we need elastic tissue to reduce pressure. Pressure is at its highest in the arteries because that is what is receiving all that pumped blood from the heart. So the pressure is very, very high, okay? So this would be the arteries, okay? And this is to reduce pressure fluctuations created by the heart during pumping, all right? And to keep the blood flowing during diastole, which is basically the relaxation of the heart, okay, during diastole. All right, which type of blood vessel has valves? We just talked about that one. Remember, veins have the smallest amount of pressure, all right? So because of that, if there's not enough pressure in the veins, that blood isn't flowing very quickly, so veins have them. And they do this to, remember, back to the heart, to prevent backflow of blood. Okay. All right. So the valves are actually really, here's a little fun fact for you. The valves in the veins, especially in the limbs, if anyone has ever seen someone who has varicose veins, it's kind of like the squiggly looking appearance that veins have. Usually you see it in a lot of the geriatric, the elderly population. That's because the valves at that point have actually failed or are not working anymore, so all that blood just kind of pools in those veins, and the veins collapse because of that. Okay, so the varicose veins, kind of that spider-looking appearance. So, show a quick little example of that, what that looks like. Yeah, you can kind of see all these guys right here. So, kind of all like this. You've probably seen these guys. Yeah, this is probably the best example here. Okay. So varicose veins, yeah, that are visible in the skin causes weak valves. Okay, like I said, weak valves in the veins to prevent blood from flowing backwards. So the valves have kind of collapsed and they're not at their strongest. Okay, so that's that. Fun fact. All right, which type of vessel has no tunica media? We just talked about that one. Remember, it's the capillaries. And that's because it would significantly impede with diffusion. Remember, having extra layers impedes with diffusion, all right, which we don't want to have in the capillaries, okay? And lastly, which type of blood vessels contain smooth muscle? Almost all of them do, okay? Remember, the smooth muscle and all that stuff is located in the tunica media. So because of that, we know that since the capillaries don't have the tunica media, they don't fall into this category. So because of that, it's just going to be the arteries and veins. Okay. All right. Well, I think that will pretty much cover the histology here. And number 2 is the model. We don't have that obviously, so we'll have to do that later. Stop the video here. I think we can scroll back up here and say that we did a good chunk of 1. Okay, we did a good chunk of 1. We're for sure gonna finish 1 and 3 in the next video, but just for the sake of time and saving your guys' sanity, I think this is a good place to stop. And then we'll continue on with this and this right after. All right.